The diplomatic backchannels of the Middle East have just been blown wide open. The massive shockwaves are currently tearing through every major capital on Earth. What was supposed to be a highly classified negotiation has suddenly become an explosive geopolitical earthquake. Welcome to Politique News. I am your host, and in my 20 years of reporting from the front lines of global power struggles, I have rarely seen a diplomatic revelation of this magnitude. Today, I want to explain a rapidly unfolding international crisis. What I am seeing right now is the absolute catastrophic collapse of a shadow negotiation that could have fundamentally altered the course of modern history. An incredibly sensitive 15-point peace document has just been leaked, and Tehran has violently and completely rejected it. This was supposed to be the ultimate deal, a sweeping framework designed by Donald Trump's geopolitical architects to permanently neutralize the Iranian threat without firing a single shot. Instead, this leaked ultimatum has pushed the entire Middle East directly to the absolute brink. Let me walk you through exactly what is happening behind closed doors, because the mainstream headlines are barely scratching the surface of this massive story. This is not just a failed diplomatic gesture. It is a profound restructuring of global financial and military leverage. To understand the sheer gravity of this rejection, we have to look at the immediate context of the global stage. The Middle East has been locked in a paralyzing cycle of proxy warfare, covert sabotage, and crippling economic sanctions for years on end. Western strategists believed that Iran's deeply fractured economy, battered by relentless inflation and domestic unrest, would finally force the supreme leader to the negotiating table. They calculated that Tehran was desperate enough for financial relief to accept a highly restrictive, binding peace framework. That calculation was catastrophically wrong. The moment this 15-point document landed on the desks of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, it was not viewed as a viable pathway to peace, but rather as an insulting, non-negotiable demand for their absolute, unconditional surrender. So what exactly was inside this explosive document that triggered such a fierce and immediate backlash? My sources across the intelligence community have scrutinized the leaked points, and the demands effectively require the complete dismantling of Iran's entire sovereign and military identity. The very first point reportedly demands the immediate, irreversible destruction of Iran's deeply fortified underground nuclear enrichment facilities. We are talking about sites like Fordo and Natanz, installations that Tehran has spent billions of dollars and decades of immense labor to aggressively protect. It does not stop at simply halting uranium enrichment. The document mandates unfettered, unannounced, anywhere and anytime access for international nuclear inspectors. For a regime fundamentally built on extreme secrecy and sovereign defiance, opening their most sensitive military bunkers to foreign eyes is a profound non-starter. But the nuclear demands are only the beginning of this geopolitical ultimatum. Point number 4 directly targets the absolute lifeblood of Iran's regional power projection, demanding the immediate and total cessation of all financial and military support to their vast network of regional proxies. This means abandoning Hezbollah in Lebanon, cutting off the Houthis in Yemen, and entirely defunding the heavily armed militias operating across Iraq and Syria. The architects of this plan demanded that Tehran essentially amputate its own strategic arms across the entire Middle Eastern theater. From the perspective of the Iranian leadership, these proxy networks are not simply foreign policy tools. They are their ultimate forward defense mechanism. Without them, Iran loses its critical asymmetric deterrence against superior Western militaries and the highly advanced capabilities of the Israeli Defense Forces. The document then drives a dagger straight into the heart of Iran's conventional military doctrine. It strictly requires the immediate cessation of all advanced ballistic missile development, demanding that Tehran scrap the very weapons systems they rely upon to project power across the Gulf. You have to understand that for 20 years, I have watched Iran pour an unprecedented amount of its national wealth into precision-guided munitions. Asking them to unilaterally destroy their primary offensive deterrent is the equivalent of asking a superpower to voluntarily disarm its military. Perhaps the most highly contentious demand buried within the 15 points is the requirement for Tehran to officially recognize the sovereignty of allied Western states in the region, effectively dismantling their decades-long ideological stance against Israel. This crosses the ultimate, immovable ideological red line. What we are analyzing here is not a traditional diplomatic compromise where both sides yield ground. This leaked plan is a maximalist document, echoing the aggressive maximum pressure campaigns of the past, but amplified to an entirely new level of unyielding geopolitical brinkmanship. It is a stark proposition, capitulate to every single Western security demand, dismantle your regional empire, and hand over your most advanced weaponry, or face total economic annihilation. There is absolutely no strategic off-ramp provided for the Iranian regime to save face domestically. The reaction from Tehran was as swift as it was brutal. High-ranking officials did not just reject the framework. They weaponized the leak for massive domestic propaganda, parading the document as undeniable proof that the West seeks nothing less than the destruction of Iran. State television networks in Tehran are currently broadcasting fiery condemnations, framing the 15-point plan as a neo-imperialist blueprint designed to enslave the Iranian nation. They are actively using this leaked document to fiercely rally their domestic base and justify further aggressive military escalations. The Supreme Leader has reportedly dismissed the document outright, firmly stating that negotiating under these extreme, maximalist conditions would be a historic betrayal of the revolution. He has effectively shut down all active back-channel communications, plunging the diplomatic arena into a freezing, impenetrable silence. But the geopolitical fallout extends far beyond the hostile rhetoric echoing through the halls of Tehran. This spectacular collapse of diplomacy is currently sending violent, unpredictable shockwaves directly through the heart of the global financial system, specifically within the highly volatile energy sector. Right now, commodity traders in London and New York are frantically repricing global risk. The sudden realization that a diplomatic solution is completely dead in the water means that the threat of a kinetic military confrontation in the Persian Gulf has exponentially skyrocketed overnight. We are already witnessing a sharp, aggressive spike in crude oil futures. The markets inherently understand that if diplomacy completely fails, the next logical step in this high-stakes standoff is a direct physical confrontation that could easily choke off the Strait of Hormuz. Let me be absolutely clear about what that means for your wallet. Over 20% of the world's global petroleum supply passes through that incredibly narrow, highly contested maritime choke point. If Iran decides to weaponize that strait in retaliation, the global economy will crash. We are talking about crippling supply chain disruptions, soaring inflation, and a devastating energy crisis that would immediately paralyze industrial production across Europe and Asia. The financial stakes attached to this failed 15-point peace plan are truly existential for the modern, interconnected global economy. Furthermore, this massive diplomatic rupture is actively accelerating a dangerous geopolitical realignment that I have been tracking for years. By pushing Iran entirely into a corner with this maximalist ultimatum, the West has inadvertently solidified Tehran's desperately growing strategic partnerships with Moscow and Beijing. Isolated from Western markets and facing the threat of overwhelming military force, Iran is rapidly pivoting eastward. They are actively securing massive, long-term oil contracts with China and finalizing advanced military defense pacts with Russia, fundamentally altering the global balance of power. What I am seeing right now is the rapid formation of a deeply entrenched anti-Western geopolitical bloc. This 15-point plan, intended to isolate and break the Iranian regime, may have actually accelerated the creation of a powerful, unified alliance of heavily armed adversaries. The Pentagon and allied defense ministries are now in a state of hyper-alert, with the diplomatic off-ramp permanently closed. Military planners are dusting off contingency operations. The presence of carrier strike groups in the region is no longer just a deterrent. It is preparation. We are transitioning from a phase of high-stakes diplomatic maneuvering directly into a period of extreme military vulnerability. Every single drone flight, every naval patrol in the Gulf, and every missile test is now heavily laden with the massive potential for a catastrophic miscalculation. The leaked document has also created a profound political headache for American allies stationed in the Middle East. Gulf nations, who desperately want regional stability, are now caught in the terrifying crossfire between Washington's uncompromising demands and Tehran's deeply furious, unpredictable military posture. These regional partners know that if this shadow war suddenly turns hot, their critical energy infrastructure, glittering financial capitals, and sovereign territories will be on the absolute front lines. They are quietly panicking as the diplomatic safety net completely disintegrates before their eyes. It is crucial to understand the psychology behind this specific style of high-stakes negotiation. Proposing a 15-point ultimatum that you know the adversary will reject is often a calculated pretext. It establishes a hardline narrative, shifting the ultimate blame for the ensuing conflict. By officially putting these sweeping, impossible demands on paper, even in a backchannel setting, the architects of this plan can now confidently claim to the international community that they exhausted every diplomatic avenue before resorting to crippling kinetic strikes or devastating new economic warfare. This is a classic, deeply cynical maneuver in the grand chessboard of international geopolitics. You offer a peace deal heavily disguised as a surrender document, wait for the inevitable, furious rejection, and then use that very rejection as the absolute moral justification for war. As a seasoned geopolitical analyst, I must warn you that the timeline for de-escalation has practically evaporated. The leak of this document was likely intentional, designed to force all players to openly show their hands and permanently burn down the fragile bridges of compromise. We are now entering an incredibly dark, highly volatile Chapter in International Relations. The gloves are completely off, the shadow games are over, and the harsh, brutal reality of hard power is taking absolute center stage in the Middle Eastern theater of operations. The next few weeks will be absolutely critical for the survival of the global economic order. We must closely watch for any sudden movements of military assets, cyber attacks on critical infrastructure, or aggressive proxy mobilizations that signal the immediate start of a broader conflict. Iran will undoubtedly attempt to re-establish deterrence by orchestrating highly visible provocative actions. Whether it is harassing commercial shipping vessels, accelerating their uranium enrichment to near weapons grade, or unleashing their proxy militias, Tehran will forcefully demonstrate that they cannot simply be dictated to. Simultaneously, Western powers will be forced to fiercely respond to these provocations to maintain their geopolitical credibility. It is a terrifying, rapidly accelerating spiral of escalation, driven by the absolute failure of a 15-point document that was dead the second it was written. This situation perfectly encapsulates the harsh, unforgiving nature of modern global statecraft. In a world defined by fiercely competing interests and deeply entrenched ideologies, sweeping diplomatic solutions are often nothing more than a carefully crafted mirage, hiding the grim, inevitable reality of conflict. The illusion of a quick, clean resolution to the Iranian crisis has been violently shattered. We are left staring into the abyss of a deeply entrenched, multi-generational power struggle that will inevitably define the security architecture of the 21st century for decades to come. We at Politique News are utilizing every single resource, every intelligence contact, and every analytical tool at our disposal to bring you the unfiltered reality of this massive crisis. Mainstream networks will give you the polished political spin. We will give you the absolute truth. You must prepare yourselves and your portfolios for massive, unprecedented volatility in the coming days. The collapse of this backchannel negotiation is not just a distant political headline. It is a seismic geopolitical event that will directly impact global supply chains and inflation metrics. Do not let the complexity of these international events blind you to their immediate, real-world consequences. The failure of this 15-point ultimatum is a stark, brutal reminder that global stability hangs by an incredibly thin, fragile thread, and that thread is rapidly fraying today. As the dust settles on this spectacular diplomatic collapse, the entire world holds its collective breath, nervously waiting for the next inevitable move on this highly explosive global chessboard. The rules of engagement have changed, and the stakes have literally never been higher before. I will continue to relentlessly monitor this rapidly developing, incredibly dangerous situation, breaking down the complex geopolitical maneuvers and translating the intelligence so that you can stay ahead of the curve. You cannot afford to ignore the massive shifts happening right before our eyes. Thank you for joining me today. How global events are shaping the future of finance, power, and international stability. Politique News.